Hey, all right, what's up, everybody? We're going to be sketching a skull today. I've already got a bunch of questions to kind of get into, but I'm going to make sure that I kind of start drawing so that we have something to kind of look at while we're talking. I just want to mention also that I hope that you're sketching along. If you have like ideas for stuff that you think would kind of be interesting for a live sketch, like just let me know. You can find me on Instagram, Patreon, the YouTube comments. I'm very easy to reach, so if you got ideas and stuff, just let me know. And if you have questions during this session, also just put them in, and I'm gonna get to as many as I can. Sometimes I miss them, sometimes I don't. But if you got a good question, I'll definitely do my best to kind of get to it. But I'm gonna be just sketching this skull. So I've already got like kind of several questions in, so I'm just going to start getting to them in the order that I got them. And if, by the way, just for my own peace of mind, if anybody in the comment section wants to let me know that the sound is doing perfect, that'd be really awesome. But Greed Marks asks, I found myself in a funny spot where I have tons of materials to study from, but I don't really know what I should start with to improve gradually and not skip something important. Yeah, I mean that's in a way, right? Like that's kind of the bind that like everybody's in right now, where all these artists are out there, kind of putting stuff, making things available online, and there's not like because it's not really like governed or organized in any way. How does a student know, like a student who ostensibly like doesn't know what they don't know yet? How do you know kind of where to start? So it's a great question, I think, and one that it's going to have like a variety of answers. I'm going to try and give you like the version of it that I feel like at the very least won't cause cause any confusion, right? But I think that you do need to kind of have some kind of self-assessment. Kind of look at your own work and kind of compare it to, let's say, the work that instructor was kind of putting out. Try and make sure that the work that you're going to be studying has a kind of aesthetic that you like. I know that seems like it would be self-evident, but there's everybody has a kind of different taste, and I can say from experience that really like everything about your training is going to find its way into your work. And so if you want your work to look a certain way, then you need to train, with an artist or train a kind of in a way that kind of lends itself to that appearance, right? And again, like I'm sure it's kind of self-evident, when I say it, it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but it's not something maybe necessarily I knew about when I went to study. Like, I think I just kind of I kind of found a school and I just applied and hoped that all the things that I wanted to happen would happen. And I was fortunate in that it worked out that way. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to work out that way. It doesn't have to all kind of wind up as it should. But just kind of look at the aesthetic of the work and try to make an informed decision based on that. After that, like as a student starting out, one of the most important things that you can have really is just mileage. Let's say like that, I think, how to put this? All of the different kind of teachers out there that are kind of working, if their work is good, there's going to be some value in their teaching, and I think it's up to you. By the way, you might like be hearing my neighbor's kids outside having an absolute party in the background of this. But if you are, that's just suburban life, man. That's just how it goes. But I just wanted to mention, right, like that. Uh, Once you kind of start on a course, I would say evaluate it after you've done a dozen drawings, not after you've done one. I think you really need to kind of like put in the time actually with that kind of study in order to get to a place where you might really get some understanding of the value of that course, right? So try to be, I think, a little bit patient with yourself and with the knowledge straight away. I say this because I mean, I've been teaching for maybe since 2000 and I think maybe 2006. I started as a student teacher. So, you can do the math. And, it's a very common refrain that like a student will try out something, briefly and have like a really hasty judgment. Like, they do one underpainting, right, in raw umber and go, and it doesn't like maybe look the coolest or it doesn't do the thing that they wanted to do. And they'll go, well, underpaintings are like useless. I don't need to do underpaintings. And I say it's like I was guilty about this too, not necessarily with underpaintings, but with color studies. I don't know if anybody out there has like worked with an artist or a teacher who has like recommended a lot, like to do these like small oil painted color studies. When I first started out doing those as a student, I was like, these are a joke. Like I don't see what the value of it is, and so I even for a while like didn't do them. Now, like obviously in retrospect, I feel it's like very cringe-worthy, right? That I thought I was so bright that I could tell color studies were useless. Well, it turns out actually they're profoundly useful. They're incredibly useful, and I recommend them to students nowadays. So just to say, like, don't be too hasty in like making up your mind about how valuable you think something is, because really you're just starting out. You're trying to figure out like a basis for your practice, and that's going to take some time. So be patient, and be patient with yourself, by the way. Like I thought, I had that mentality, that I should be done yesterday. Like I should have figured this out already. And it turns out that, actually it takes a long time to, I think, become like really good at something. So there you go. Yeah, so that's that question. There's a couple questions after that, are really like quite a few questions. But the next one's from Joe, and he says, "What's the inspiration behind drawing portraits like sculptures, and what technical things do you do to achieve this?" That's an interesting question. So like, there's a group of like kind of artworks that I'm making now that are really about my passion for sculpture. I think like in reality, and like I have a fantasy that I would be like that I could have been a sculptor, right? Rather than a 2D artist. Of course, I trained to be a 2D artist, so that's what I do professionally. But in my secret life, like I'm a sculptor. So I thought, well, I want to make paintings that kind of have like that sense about them that sculptures have. And one of the things that sculptures do is they kind of sit in this contextless space, right? Which is to say, like if I put a sculpture in front of a blank wall, it would look one way, and if I put it in front of I don't know, in front of like a landscape, distant mountains, it would still look the same in a sense, right? It would just be in a different context. So the sculpture itself does not contain a context, and I really like that sense that it's like an object. So one of the things that I've been trying to figure out for a long time as well is like how to take the aesthetic that I have like in my drawings and also use that in my paintings. So one of the things that like drawings do really well is they kind of operate like a sketch. Like a sketch doesn't really necessarily have like an objective background either. A sketch kind of exists in this contextless space. And so I started kind of painting pictures where it was like this isolated like object in nothing, in no context. And that's kind of the first idea that I have about trying to create that sense that sculptures have. It's a long process, but it's something. It's like an artistic goal that I have, which I spend a lot of time and energy. As a teacher, of course, it doesn't mean I don't have like my own artistic goals. So that's kind of one of them. And I recognize also like it's kind of esoteric. Like it's not you know, this isn't going to be the most like popular idea in the world, you know, like, I mean, um, you know, attractive landscapes are always going to be in vogue. They're always going to be in the public taste, you know, just because it's, you know, artists, you know, paintings are a kind of decoration also. So anyway, my point is I'm not doing it for like any kind of commercial end because I think it actually, I don't think it will be particularly popular. I think that people that know me and listen to me and like maybe know a bit about my work, I think they might enjoy them, and I'll enjoy them. So I think that's where I'm kind of at with it. Let's see. Another question comes from. Oh wow, I missed too many questions. I got to scroll back here. I also have to cough. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, so Michael Joshua asks, what is the difference between a highlight and a specular highlight, and what do you do to your brushes at the end of every painting day? Well, a highlight and a specular highlight essentially, as I understand them, are effectively the same thing. Just the specular highlight refers to something quite specific. It refers to like, you know, why it appears the way that it does. That is a reflective highlight. But there is like a highlight and a center light. So those are different. The center light is just the plane which is facing most in the direction of the light source. So that would be I think the appropriate distinction to make there. Hope that helps, Michael. MJ, actually. For those of you out there that are in the chats, if you're saying hi to Michael Joshua, he responds well to MJ. Let's see. Kay Lunny asks, any particular websites or apps where you find references from when you're not painting from life? Lunny says that they're struggling to find pictures that aren't like kind of really manicured and things. I think that, you know, one of the things that's kind of cool right now that everybody's doing is putting out model packs. Of course, like I have model packs on my Patreon page that maybe like 2 years worth of model packs. So like every project I put out has like another model pack that kind of goes along with it. So since I've been doing this for about, actually just checked the other day, I think actually I've been on Patreon for about 32 months, which is like crazy to me that I've been on Patreon for that long, but I have. And because of that, you know, for the same subscription fee, you're getting like 32 months worth of model packs. So you can go there and find good model images. There's even some like nudes, like nude figurative work. So, or like I have Modesty. There's like a Modesty. He's wearing something, right? But it's, you know, it's 99% nude. But what I wanted to say was also like a lot of other artists out there are like putting out model packs, and also because a lot of models are like out of work. I mean, you know, the service industry was hit a lot by COVID. You know, life models, like in New York, for instance, you know, that's their job. Like a lot of people out there, like Santiago and Freddie and Liv, like these are all models I used to work with at the Academy in New Jersey. They're out of work too, you know, or have been. I mean, I think some of the schools have kind of opened back up and things, but the point is they also kind of went online, and a lot of them kind of released model packs and things like that where you can, you know, you can get a sense of, yeah, like good studio images, you know, to work from. So anyway, like a positive and a negative there. Like the negative is that COVID sucks and we're all, like we all can't like go to studios and draw. But like, by the way, you can come to YouTube and draw with me. But anyway, you get the point. There's model packs out there from a lot of different sources. Check Loganov Studio, check my Patreon, my wife's Patreon, Cornelia. She has some really great model packs out as well. She tends to do like a little bit more with like colored backgrounds and things. And, you know, she makes them, she makes them more pretty than my model packs, but mine are very pragmatic. So anyway, it's all out there to find. Let's see. Dwayne DeCock says, "Hi Stephen, how do you spot inaccuracies in a portrait sooner?" Well, it's a cool question, but it's kind of a process in a way. Like, I kind of believe a lot in kind of constructive design, at least in the sense that I find getting a good like three-dimensional model of your subject is probably the best way to ensure that you wind up in an accurate place, and that just means kind of knowing what key points to dial into to create that sense of construction. And while that is challenging in and of itself, it's definitely solvable, right? So I think when I'll explain also, like I think one of the big issues that students will have, when they're working is it's difficult when you start from nothing, right? Like a blank canvas, to have some sense of like comparison to your subject matter. Like if I look over at this skull now, I can actually kind of compare between my skull and the skull in the photograph. I can kind of compare and see some similarities there, and that's like really a great asset to me in terms of telling what is accurate and what is inaccurate. Now, if your drawing at those early stages is a little bit too abstract, if it's it's just it's not too like clear what you're drawing. So if your blocking is kind of poor, I think that you're going to have more struggle, of course, determining what's accurate or inaccurate. So it's not so much a question of like of technique, like how do you see things more clearly. It's just you probably strive to make your blocking better, and that's why like a lot of the tutorials that I make, I try to emphasize a lot the sense of like what goes into a good block-in of this image. Because if you can arrive at that place, a lot of other things become possible to you. It's not that the drawing, is easy from there, but I would say that you will face some distinctly like less difficulty or less challenge in some aspects. And one of them is determining accuracy from an early stage. That being said, I'm also a believer that, in fact, accuracy in a drawing, I view it as kind of progressive, which is to say, I feel like the final expression of my drawing, like the last moment in my drawing, should be like the best moment, the most accurate moment. And because of that, you have a little bit of wiggle room, I think, in the early stages of a drawing, where you don't have to worry about being perfect at the start. It's about kind of building some strategies to set yourself up for success a little bit later on, right? So I hope that helps. Take the long view, I think, about your accuracy. By the way, if you guys see me like squinting down and like looking at my source image, I'm trying to kind of unify those values a little bit. Or you see me like closing one eye. I'm kind of taking a measurement from. I've got a Wacom tablet here that I'm drawing on, and so sometimes I need to like kind of step back a little bit and kind of check my proportions. It's actually a thing that I find really difficult drawing digitally. Is that, and especially like drawing live, is that if this was like a drawing that I was doing in my studio, like an analog drawing, I would have like stepped back from my easel like 5 paces by now, and I would have like compared in between my source image or the model or the cast or whatever I'm working from and my drawing. I would have gotten that big picture sense. Here, it has to be like all construction. If I don't get it through the construction, like I'm kind of not gonna get it. So I find it actually like kind of more challenging for me to be quite accurate in a digital drawing than or painting. I don't know if you can call a digital drawing like a drawing, but that's how I think of it anyway. Right. So questions. Zhu Marie says bonjour. Hello, Zhu. And let's see. Prerna Gupta says, did you learn Italian during your studying time at Florence? Sono parlo un po' italiano, but not great. I can speak enough to like get around and like order food and things. At one point in time, I could have also ordered frames. Just the usual stuff that you have to do to like just like live in a place. I could do that, but like I wasn't going to be writing, any poetry in Italian, if that if that answers your question. Um, right. Let's see. Sampo Peltola says, in the world of online art education, one is often cautioned against early specialization. What are your thoughts on the subject? Well, that's kind of an interesting take. Early specialization. Well, I mean, we have a little bit of a like kind of game of telephone here, and with teaching, a lot of times that comes up where I feel like I would have to know exactly what we mean by like early specialization, because I do kind of feel like, you know, so I'm American, of course, right? And I went to school in America as a child, and so I went through that kind of form of education, and I found that actually like specialization happens so late in America. Like you're kind of in general studies for so long, that if you actually know what you want to do, it's kind of, you kind of just have to wait forever to get there. Now, that's just my take on it, like kind of my spin. If, you're in a situation where you're just taking like kind of, I guess, general studies, like you're just kind of interested in art and curious about art in general, I would say, yeah, like stay open to, like what we're saying, right, is like stay open to possibilities. Well, that's, nobody's going to argue against that. That sounds fine. um, but I think also to like get really good at this stuff anyway, it's going to take you, well, a little while. So I don't know, like for me, if I had gone to like the Florence Academy, right, and said, well, I'm just going to keep my options open, I feel like I may have suffered a little bit from like not being as full on immersed in this thing. And I think that immersion for me was really important to kind of get where I had to go. So maybe I would just temper that opinion and say that also, there's gonna be an argument as well for specializing actually. So yeah, for whatever it's worth, there's kind of two sides to that story, I feel like. And I think that you can, obviously, everybody's got to be their own kind of best judge about that, and try and gain as much context as you can in terms of why, what that advice is about. I say what I say about it because I know it takes a really long time and it takes total immersion to get good at representational art. Like you're not going to get really good at representational painting by doing it halfway. Now, at least, you know what? Unless you're supremely talented. I had to totally immerse in it, and for me, it was not an option to like kind of keep my options open. But say you're an 18-year-old kid and you're just trying to figure it all out, and you just like drawing. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you keep your options open. Um, but what that does also is that kind of keeps you sometimes maybe at a slightly superficial level of knowledge. Like when I think about drawing lessons, when I think about like drawing lessons that I give, for instance, just hearing what it's about is not the learning. Like if all you ever do is you go to like my Patreon and all that you ever do is you just watch the videos, I'm sure there's some like value in that, but it's limited. Like you need to like get it into your hand. You need to have it be like a practical thing. It's like reading a book on basket weaving. It doesn't mean you weave a basket. Like you gotta you gotta weave a few thousand baskets to kind of yeah, to build up that skill set. So yeah, balanced answer right there. Let's see. Let's see. My MJ asks, will there be more figure drawing tutorials in the future? Any tips for someone who has never drawn the figure before? I will definitely do figure drawing tutorials, but they will probably happen on a different website. The problem that I have with figure drawing tutorials really is just about so I run my own business, right? Like my Patreon is my livelihood, and so what I do is I make the content, I do the teaching, I do the advertising, I put it out there on Patreon and YouTube and so on. And what I've discovered actually is that for whatever the reason, the audience that I have on Instagram, has some sensitivity about nudity, or Instagram's algorithm, has sensitivity about nudity. And so I was actually, this is like a whole rabbit hole to get down, so I'm not going to go all the way into it. But around the time that I released my one figure drawing tutorial on Patreon, which is still out there, by the way, you can sample it on my website, Stephen Malman Artwork. But about the time that I did that, my account got shadow banned. So my reach kind of like dropped precipitously to like nearly zero, and like it stayed that way for probably a month. So that basically means like I can't distribute like a nude drawing tutorial. And like if you're drawing the figure, you're drawing the nude, right? So anyway, in any event, long story short, I will do another one. It'll either be with Stan Prokopenko on his site, or it will be on Streamline Art Video. So in one of those two places, eventually that's where the release will be. And of course, it'll probably be like a one-time sale kind of purchase as well. Yeah, so that's what that is. Let's see what's next. Theodora, wow, Nikute, maybe that's the last name. Which is a better substitute for lead white, zinc or titanium? Well, it's a good thing that that you bring up the options. If you want something that behaves a little bit more like lead white, then you're going to use zinc. But the long-term use of zinc is eventually not good for your painting. So paint, this is going to get so boring. Listen, if you aren't into oil painting, now's a good time to like put on some music and just sketch. But I'll try and be brief. The thing about oil paint is that over time it can become brittle, and different pigments have different kind of levels of being brittle. So zinc white is notoriously quite brittle, and that can lead to something called delamination. So delamination is basically when your painting literally flakes off of the substrate, which is your linen or your canvas, right? Or your panel or whatever it is. Now, it's so boring. Rigid substrates like panels are better for more brittle pigments. So if you were going to use zinc white, if you were really quite intent upon doing so, then you would want a rigid substrate like a panel. There's a lot of companies out there that make really great panels. You can also make them yourself, but there's also a skill in doing that. So if you go to, I think it's New Traditions Art Panels, and they do not sponsor me, but New Traditions Art Panels makes a good panel, and they're expensive, but they are rigid and they are just what they need to be. So if that's what you want to pursue, zinc white, I would say get yourself a rigid substrate and go for it. You can also just take birch panels yourself, prime them with acrylic gesso. But the thing that can happen with panels, of course, is that if the wood is not kiln dried, then you can have the chance that the panel itself will warp over time. So there's considerations there as well. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that one. Let's see. Jamy asks, I love color studies, but I can't stop myself from completing it with detail. It defeats the purpose. Well, a little bit, I mean, as a teacher, so much of my conversation is around optimizing, right? How do we do studies the right way? How do we learn to draw the right way? Which means that, time is a consideration, because we are all, very mortal. And it takes a long time to learn to kind of draw and paint. So, when I consider doing color studies, yeah, sure. You don't want to go into the detail. If you eventually do go into the detail, well, guess what? It's not the end of the world, is it? It's just you just went a bit into the detail, and and you get to like maybe have fun doing that. By the way, like I think a part of well, not I don't think, but I'm sure that a part of like doing this is kind of staying motivated. And for me, if something's not kind of a little bit fun, frankly, like I'm not gonna do it as much. You know. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents about it. So don't feel any guilt about it, Jimmy. Just do what you got to do. Ju Marie asks, have you ever done any watercolor painting? If you do, which brand of watercolor paint do you suggest? I have done some watercolor painting. For those of you that follow me on Instagram, you'll probably know my watercolor paintings, as I've posted a few of them there over the years. But the watercolor paint that I'm not, by the way, like I've been asked a few times to like do like a watercolor workshop or something. I'll never, I don't want to say never, but like I am unlikely to ever teach watercolor painting. Mostly because like I do it because I enjoy doing it. I've never like trained as a watercolor painter. So I don't feel like I'd have a tremendous amount of like didactic value to add to like the watercolor world. There's a great artist called Mario Robinson out there. If you're a watercolor painter, I would definitely check out his work. Yeah, but I think you can get, there's a lot of different brands that are great. I think I tend to use Sennelier, and I kind of like the product that they put out. But this is just totally like performance based. I don't even know, truth be told, I wouldn't know how to determine a qualitatively better watercolor paint from a totally average run of the mill watercolor paint. By the way, I'm getting into these shadow shapes now, just in case everybody was wondering. In the drawing, like I find, in the last one that I did, the last skull that I sketched, I just kind of blocked it in big kind of masses of value and then built the structure up from there. And I'm totally comfortable to work that way. But I thought for this one, I'd kind of build up a little bit more kind of linear structure before I went into it. So I think that maybe it's a little bit more descriptive for, in a teaching sense. I mean, like, again, it's about what's optimal, not necessarily what can be done. Yeah. Anyway, so let's see what the next comment is here. Let's see. Sampo asks, do you have any insight on how to deal with a sense of being overwhelmed as an art student? There is simply, oh, I just lost that. There's simply so much to study, and I often feel it'd take a lifetime to get it all. Does it ever get easier? Well, yeah, no, it gets easier. I think that, early on, you're just in that place where it's kind of information overload. I mean, this is especially if you're, like you go to an institution and study, you're being immersed into this curriculum that's probably taken, decades to build up, and you're just kind of diving into it without usually much of a preface. So yeah, like it definitely gets easier. I mean, learning gets easier. Painting probably stays just about the same. Actually, painting like almost gets more difficult with time, in the sense that like once you kind of know what you're doing, it starts to really hit home like how hard it is to do it, and you start to like judge yourself with a very different set of criteria, right? There's a great kind of graph actually about this where, and I think maybe I've mentioned this in like a previous stream, but where you kind of, there's a difference in between like what you think you know and what you actually know, and that becomes like startlingly apparent in drawing and painting, because it's such like a self-evident thing. Like if you know how to do it, then it will look like you know how to do it, and if you don't, it will look like you don't know how to do it. So we kind of go through these periods of frustration in our learning, and it usually has to do with like a kind of contrast in between what we're able to see and what we're able to do. And as time goes on, as your career goes on, the gap in between those two, I don't know what you want to call them, but those two facts, it stays there forever. The gap is always there in between what you're able to see and what you're able to do. So that never really changes. But your perspective about it, I think, changes. Which is to say, like, I don't really get bent out of shape too badly when I'm doing some like work that I think is not so good. For me, it's just another day at the office, and I'll get it eventually, I'm sure. So that part changes, yeah. Hope that helps, Sample. Oh no, whole bunch of questions here, and I need to scroll back a little bit. Let's see. Jules Marie asks, I've seen one of your oil painting works that you transfer a sketch on a canvas by some kind of paper. I wonder what is the name of the paper. Yeah, it's just any kind of transparent, like it's tracing paper. Like, so you put that paper like over your drawing, and I've usually kind of like spray fixed my drawing by the time that I do that. You can or not. I mean, it doesn't. If you don't really care about the drawing, then just do whatever you got to do. But after that, you just kind of trace it with graphite, and then you want to, of course, rub some charcoal on the back of that, and then you've got your transfer drawing. Put that on the canvas, and yeah, you're good to go. Let's see. Matthew Conrad says hello from Seattle. Hello, Matthew. And a name that I cannot pronounce because it's all consonants, it seems. Says, when drawing or painting a skull like this, which I assume you've done many, many times before, what is your goal with the drawing? That's a fair question. I think that there's drawing that is like explorative drawing. Like for students, sometimes it's very important, I think, that you just go into a drawing with like a zero consequences kind of mentality, because you just basically need to kind of learn some stuff. Like you need to figure out, what the forms in a skull are. And if you're going in there like trying to make like a pretty drawing, then that's kind of going to stand in your way a little bit. So great question about like what your intention is in terms of drawing. Really, actually a really important factor in kind of getting what you're trying to get out of it. For me, with these, I like to kind of practice and sharpen my sketching skills. And also, I mean, drawing is also for me eventually just like it's a fun activity, I mean, yeah, sure, it's work, but also it's kind of relaxing. Yeah, actually, oddly enough, even if I'm live streaming, drawing is actually a little bit of a kind of relaxing, kind of chilled thing for me. So I just wanted these drawings to be, and this is like for everybody as well, like why do I even like bother doing a live stream like this? When I was at the academy, we'd always have like kind of drawing evenings, right? Like every Tuesday and Wednesday, and even on the night of my anatomy course on Thursdays, like I would be together with like a bunch of students in a studio, like 15 or 20 students, and we'd all just be like drawing, and it was great. It was great to do then, and I kind of miss doing that now. And I know also that like all right, here's the real deal. Online students, you're out there in the world, and you got families, and you got demands, and you got all this stuff like asking for your time, and there's no like studio necessarily that you have to go to where drawing is taking place. So I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was some kind of drawing evening happening that could provide people a little bit of extra kind of motivation to take the time away and actually get to drawing. I remember there was a really cool guy that was the director of sculpture when I was at the academy, Rob Bodum, and and I've told this story like 1,000 times. If you've watched all my live streams, probably you've heard this already, so I apologize. But if you didn't hear this story before, then this will be news to you. But he just said, he was talking about this guy that had left the academy, and he said that Well, now like the real difficulty is, and this guy was really talented too. The difficulty is like nobody's actually asking him, to get up every morning and make a sculpture. It's just not, the world doesn't kind of ask you for that. It asks you for everything else, really. And being at a school, one of the great advantages is that every day you are compelled to get up, get out, do a drawing, or do a painting, or do whatever, whatever's in your particular practice. So anyway, I just wanted to provide like a way for that kind of motivation to seep back into people's lives. Yeah, so there you go. Let's see. Matthew Conrad asks, great channel. Really enjoyed your Bugro video, just watched it. This is a good video. Thanks so much, Matthew. Art A asks, what kind of knowledge or experience do you think we are missing out on by only working from photographs as opposed to a live model? This is a cool question. It's actually a really, really cool question. One of the things that you miss out on, and this is, for me eventually is pretty critical. When I'm looking at like, let's say my hand, right? I have the possibility to look around it and kind of understand it in 3 dimensions. When you're working from a photograph, you only have 2 dimensions to start with. So the risk that you run to be kind of copying shapes and not really understanding the form and structure of something, is massive. And so you can wind up, I think it's a lot easier to become like an artist who just kind of copies shapes if you're only ever studying from photographs. There are, I don't know if you want to say like ways around that, but there are things that, to do about that. And it's to study overtly structure and try to understand the head from a structural perspective rather than just from a visual perspective. So it's not that it's this irreplaceable thing, but that doesn't mean it's harmless either. What it is, though, is it's a critical and integral factor in like the nature of what a photograph is that actually makes it a little bit of a challenge if it's not answered. By the way, I studied at a school where we only worked from life, and I worked from life exclusively for probably like 5 or 6 years there. Maybe I would do the odd portrait commission from a photo or something, but it was all about interpreting nature. Well, here's the deal. It was also a school that was solely focused on like the visual impression, to the extent that, structure, the idea of like 3-dimensional wireframe structures was just not a thing that was talked about. It was not a thing that was taught. And so in some ways, like I wound up making, I think, like very flat drawings early on. Now, because I worked a long time on them and also like I'm not bad at drawing, I was able to kind of, make some pretty good work. But that being said, it was still very flat, and I still had to take my own time eventually to figure out what like really 3-dimensional kind of structure-based drawing was all about. And so anyway, I just say it's a little bit of a what's the word, like it's not true so much that just because you work from life you'll have a better 3D sensibility. It depends upon really like who you studied with and how, what kind of concepts that teacher is gonna teach you about. So there you go. That's my take on that. Ben is asking, any tips on making a painting or drawing more detailed? I'm having a hard time with details. That's a fair question. Making a drawing more detailed. I don't know. That's a weird. I've never actually encountered the question of like the quantity of detail in a drawing. Wait, a drawing or a painting? Sorry, yeah, or a drawing or a painting, either one. Well, I mean, it is a little bit about the sounds like retrograde and how simple it is, but it is a little bit about the size of brushes that you use. Like I was always taught, to paint with like really big brushes and to kind of work on things that way. And that leaves a particular kind of drawing behind, and that's that was the desirable thing when I was studying. But if for instance, what you do miss out on is like some of the like smaller detail, like around the eyes or something, that's not really reflected in that work that I made at the time. My paintings were very, very broad, and broad doesn't mean bad. It's just different, right? Like it's looking at Sargent instead of looking at Van Dyke or Van Eyck, sorry. Uh, so you can see eventually, that it's not so much a qualitative difference to be lacking or not to have that kind of detail. I think it's totally okay. But if you wanted to augment that, I think it starts a little bit with your materials. And then obviously it moves on from there to be your responsibility to hone in on that level of detail. But at least that's one thing you can do. All right. Andy Rodriguez says, "Hi Bauman, great job today." Thank you, Andy. And N. Gordy says, "Hi, do you think that digital and traditional drawing are two separate worlds, or can we improve at the same time using both?" Well, have you all out there like read Loomis's book on drawing on heads anyway? Because in it he touches on something that I feel is actually like really important. One of the things he talks about is like he kind of separates a little bit. If you are working as somebody like who is painting and drawing like for a passion for painting and drawing, you have slightly different considerations than if you're in his era, right? There was like a lot of like commercial artists, like so you could marketing firms and things, like everything that was made up was like made of like painters and paintings and artwork and so on. And so there was this like kind of high commercial demand for it. And so he took the time in his book to kind of distinguish in between whether your goal was like commercial or whether it was, just for the joy of painting. And I think that when digital painting, that kind of comes up because there is still like a really high demand for, commercially for digital painters. And I bring all this up because I think then like the demands on your digital painting are going to be a little bit different also, because you're going to have to, like a good friend of mine was, used to be a teacher at the academy, used to be a director at the academy, and actually went on but he went on to be a digital painter, and he works for these kind of concept design companies in Stockholm now. And he, we were talking about like his job and stuff, and he'll be making like 2 or 3 paintings a day, and that's like a slow day. And that for our genre of painting, that's like unheard of. Like nobody actually paints like that. Maybe nobody except for like Mark D'Alessio, who's like the fastest human painter. Shout out to Mark if he ever winds up seeing this video. Shout out to Mark. But yeah, so it's just a different consideration. If you're on the fast track to be like a digital painting professional, I think actually maybe you need to actually focus on digital painting exclusively, because you're gonna have to really know like the tricks of the trade, so to speak, if you're going to kind of get out there and get really good at it. And I don't think actually that drawing in this way that is highly analog, like I'm drawing, I don't think that really serves that purpose necessarily. I mean, that's up for debate. I mean, I'm sure you could say that there's things that will be good about it, but then also there's going to be always the question like, could I be doing this more efficiently? And then the answer probably would be yes. But like in terms of like developing your design skills, yeah, sure, absolutely. It's just about optimization. I'm like a kind of a fanatic about optimization. I feel like if you're going to be doing something, I respect how long it takes to figure this stuff out, and so if I feel like I don't want to recommend to do it like necessarily like the slowest way. It's not only optimization out there, by the way. Painting is not only about optimizing, but studying for some people, like, man, it costs money to be out there in school. It costs time. You certainly want to do it in the way that is going to make the most out of the time that you spend, and that's what I'm always thinking about. Right. So MJ says, Stephen, your voice sounds perfect to sing White Christmas. MJ, believe me, you don't know that. It's bad. It's bad when singing happens here. My wife, however, she's a really great, I think she's a really great singer. If you asked her, maybe she would think she is just average, but it sounds very nice to me. But I sound awful. I sound horrible. We're not going to get into that. Let's see here. Seriously Dude says, do you have any tips for improving fast in perspective? I just entered art school and I'm struggling with finding the right exercises. Mostly struggling with drawing city scenes. Got some tips. Whew, perspective. I mean, in terms of like getting good at it fast, I think so. All right, let's a little bit of background. Like I'm definitely not like the strongest in perspective. I understand the rudiments of it. I could not teach perspective per se. I'm sure if I focused on it for a while, that I could understand it and then convey that. But at present, it's just not being a focus for my teaching. That being said, I have watched quite a few videos about it and kind of dabbled with it, and I feel pretty confident to say that there's like a lot of good perspective tutorials out there. I don't even know if you'd eventually have to pay for it to find a good one. So certainly, find a good good instructor for it, and then just make sure you do the work. I mean, again, so much of it's going to be like a bit of a practical understanding that if you kind of practice it, I think you'll come to it quite easily. If you focus only and always like on the conceptual part of it, like if you just sit around watching videos all the time, that's going to be time that you probably should have spent, just doing the drawings. Because again, it is a practical thing. It's not, I mean, there's the conceptual language to it, but that has to be translated into action to do any good whatsoever. So just find a decent video and make 100 drawings. In a way, I guess probably simple answer there. Actually, I have to drink some water. Hang on a second, guys. All right. Let's see. Ryan Abigan asks, hi, Stephen. I was just wondering if you experienced any difficulties or learning curves going from traditional to digital, if you have any tips for these. Well, learning curves, I mean, it's really about, what you try to do. I don't actually try to do much with digital painting. I mean, I got an iPad, several, years back, and I downloaded Procreate and I kind of, made some Procreate paintings and stuff, and I didn't experience much of like any curve there, really. But again, it was down to like also what I was trying to do. Like I wasn't, I'm not the most ambitious digital painter out there, not by a long shot, obviously. But I think that like just getting into anything, there's going to be some resistance, But unfortunately, like it's not sophisticated advice to give. It was kind of what I was saying to the guy that asked previously. I think, all right, so here's an actual tip. I was just going to say, actually, you need to do the work, but here's an actual tip about it. Focus on something that you need to do, right? When I got into Photoshop, when I first like started doing it, I just needed to learn it. And I found the resistance to be kind of tremendous. But then actually when I needed to start doing things, like I needed to start doing like, for my Patreon page, like I'm always doing like little graphic design stuff and this and that just to make it look nice so that the message gets out there in a nice palatable way. That's actually when I started accelerating in understanding like how to do stuff. But it's because I had a practical question to answer, and then that gave me the kind of momentum to just go like get the job done, right? And so if you're just trying to like learn it cold, I think probably it's pretty hard. But if you got something to do, I find I always like kind of get something done a little bit better when I'm solving a practical problem, just not like a theoretical thing. Like if I just sat down and like watched, I was answering a question earlier. I don't know if everybody was here, but I said that like if all you ever do is like watch the videos on my Patreon, like that doesn't mean that you're gonna learn from them. You need to actually draw them. I don't think I could just sit down and watch tutorial videos. It would be, I think I'd go nuts. I mean, I need to like actively do stuff to kind of learn it. Anyway, that's my take. A question in Cyrillic is, or a question from a person whose name is in Cyrillic is, hey, where do you find these skull photos? They're amazing. I took them because I have a skull and I got a Patreon, and so I needed to have some skull images. I'm not sure if I actually have source images of a skull up on my Patreon. If not, I need to. And if you're a patron of mine and you're looking for one, just remind me of it, because yeah, I should definitely have some images up for skull drawing. But yeah, I have a skull and I take photographs of it, so that's how I come to them. Oh yeah, right. Next question here. Let's see. Kaivalia Shah asks, what is your review on Bargue plate drawings? Are they good for a beginner? Sure. You know, Bargue plate drawings are really good. I would say this, and this is it's an unfortunate kind of truth about it. I think you need to have some background on the Bargues and the purpose of Bargues and like why you're doing the study and everything. I think to get the most out of them, because if you're literally just drawing them, you know, inevitably you're going to get something out of that experience, but it's not going to be like optimized learning. You know, there's going to be a lot of concepts that go probably right over your head, because these are like highly specialized lithographs, right? In the 19th century, like learning about drawing and painting was no joke. It was a huge industry. You know, being a professional artist was used for everything from commercial work to obviously like fine art applications and everything else. So there was a lot of kind of money to be made. So training artists was a highly like specialized task that was left to people that were absolute experts in the field, which, you know, probably is a little bit, well, whatever. I don't want to get into whatever's happening nowadays. But the point is, you know, these Bargues were not just made to be, you know, just notionally kind of copied for any reason. They were imbued with very particular and specific ideas that were related to concepts that were relevant to the educator's vision of the proper way to kind of learn to draw and paint. So I would say that you probably need to get like some good background, maybe even proper instruction, if you're going to get the most out of them. You know, if you really love them and you just want to check it out, they're not going to hurt. You know, it's not going to be a bad thing for you to kind of just give it a spin and draw them a bit and kind of gather what you can from it. I think that being like an autodidact is totally fine. You know, I think that even people that find like good educators, you still need to be a kind of self-starter. You still need to be like motivated to kind of do the work on your own. So just kind of depends where you're coming from there, but you're not going to regret getting some background on them. Like I said, just because they're pretty specific in what they're trying to do, and if you're not kind of dialed into that, it can be a pretty easy thing to miss. So there we go. Let's see, Jeff Fuchs says, 61 years old here, still much to learn. Jeff, I hear you, man. I hear you. Prerna Gupta asks, which are the best ateliers for studying the style of techniques that you teach online? Well, I think that you'd probably have to look at, well, that's a tricky one, right? Because I studied at the Florence Academy, but I also did a lot of like self-education after that. And like a lot of the stuff that I teach though it is, I'm sure, like that it is, well, I know that it is like also a lot involved in Florence Academy education, but there's a lot more to it actually than that. So if I had to say, like, if you wanted to draw in the way that I draw, probably the best atelier you'd go to would be to Grand Central, which is in New York. So that would be my recommendation. You're not going to go wrong with either one, really, but understand that like the Florence Academy is really just going to focus on like a visual reality, right? They're just going to have you squinting down at everything and focusing on the visual impression, which is highly effective. Like it makes good student work, but it also, it's like it's a little bit limited, if you ask me. So I think that like with anything, you're gonna have to get some, you're gonna have to drive yourself to, I think, get a totally well-rounded education. That's probably true actually wherever you study. There's so much to this stuff that it'd be difficult for one place to kind of give you everything. Yeah. Let's see. Liana Genese asks, do you zoom when you draw digitally? How many layers do you use? Oh, no, in general, no, I don't zoom in, and I just use one layer. Yeah. Rohan Rana asks, do you have any stories of annoying or bad art teachers? Oh man, I do. I don't know if I can tell them. Like, it's kind of, I don't know if I want to tell them. In high school or at any point in your education, let me tell you a great art teacher that I had. My high school art teacher, Ryan Fike, who, in terms of like his discipline, he's not an artist that is representational. He never really taught me about drawing, but he was around at like a really important time in my life when I just needed somebody to tell me that I had the option actually to study artwork. Like when I grew up, there, like, the idea that people went out and became professional artists was not even, I wouldn't have even known that it was a silly idea because I wouldn't have even known that people did it. It's not, yeah. So anyway, that was a kind of really vulnerable time for me, and he was just there to like be like a cheerleader and just go like, look, man, like you can kind of draw, so if you really want to do this, like it's possible, like go do it, and that was like kind of all the encouragement I needed. Like I eventually like went to art college and figured it out from there, but he was there to kind of give me that first nudge in the direction, just to say like, hey, this is possible to do if that's what you want, which is a pretty cool thing to kind of have somebody do. And I mean, the truth is, for all of you out there that are like kind of thinking about what you want to do, trying to figure it all out, it's possible. I mean, if you get that, like that Gattaca mentality, right? Like where this is what you're gonna do and that's that. There's a way for you to do it, and it's not, by the way, it's not easy. It's not gonna like fall into your lap, but if you're like a self-starter, you can get things done as an artist. There's a path out there for you. So let's see. Toby Michael is asking, who is the best instructor you've worked with alongside or under for drawing and painting and sculpture? And like separate genres, like the best drawing and painting, and then also sculpture. So one teacher that was, I think, really influential for me was Ramiro Sanchez. I studied with him in Florence, and he was the painter that, like, I think it's like the first like representational painter I saw where I was like, whoa, like this guy does the thing that I'd like to be able to do. And I was lucky enough to eventually like go to a school where he was teaching. So that was really, really great. And like I think a lot of the ideas that he represented, and this is kind of interesting too, because he teaches at the Florence Academy, but he was someone who was responsible for, talking about like centerline construction basically, which is, not necessarily, it's not a visual idea. So it's not really something that came up a lot, at the academy, which is, again, it's a school that's really founded on, just visual impression. Just look at the world like Velasquez did, and that's how you get to where you're going. And I think he had studied in other places, and so like had a little bit of a different perspective about it. And I think that was only for the better. Now, like when I studied with him, like I was just some punk, like I wasn't, probably wasn't. He probably had much more interesting students to talk to than me at the time. So it's not like we had like some really strong relationship when I was a student, but just to say, like, he was, like, as far as like draftsmanship was concerned, like he was like red hot. So it was really cool to get to work with him. Other good teachers I worked with, well, I learned sculpture in a way like the only sculpture that I know I learned through studying écorché, which is, if any of you know out there, like écorché is when you sculpt the body basically without skin. So it's an anatomy study. Like my only sculpture really is as like a student of anatomy in a way, and a teacher of anatomy. So I would love to, like, think I was an artistic sculptor one day, but it's not. I only sculpt to learn. But I learned that from Janne Jaskalainen, who's a Finnish artist, really chill guy. Actually, oddly enough, he was he used to be a student of mine, and later he was the one who taught me actually how to do an écorché sculpture. So, like a cool role reversal there. And let's see. Yeah, so Ramiro was great. Janne was interesting to learn sculpture from. As far as like painting teachers, there was a lot of. I mean, I don't want to like miss out on giving anybody credit for being a good teacher. All the teachers I worked with were pretty good. But also, I had probably, yeah, I probably had like a bit of a problem with authority, so I didn't really get along with a lot of my teachers. I was like a rebel completely without a cause, and so I was probably more annoying to my teachers than anything. But they were all very good, and eventually tried to try their best, I think, to communicate some good ideas. When I was a young student, like someone that really made it like a difference in my life was Simona Dolci, who was she's the director of the drawing program in Florence, and really had a lot of patience for me at the time, which was really nice. And so yeah, a lot of great teachers out there. So the meme zone says, "So if our head be broke, so our skeleton doesn't work." I don't know if I understand the question totally. But MJ asks, what is your approach to a subject where you can't block them using a wireframe concept like still lives or landscapes? Well, I would just caveat that by saying, like, you can kind of wireframe anything. So it's not a matter of, you couldn't do it that way if you really wanted to. Maybe it's just a matter of, what's most efficient. So in cases where it would be less efficient to block something in that way, what would I do? Basically, you squint down, you look at shape design. I mean, that's the kind of essential factor in when you're blocking in like landscape painting and stuff. It's really efficient to just go for shape design and kind of move on from there. And speaking of moving on, I need to like get this show on the road. Like, my skull is like drawing so slow. I mean, that's the thing also, by the way, like, chit-chatting is great, and like answering questions is great. But it definitely like slows up the drawing process. And I always feel like at the end of these sessions, like, oh, I barely got to where I was trying to get. But what are you gonna do? Let's see here. So Tim asks, what are good perspective tutorials that you've had experience with? Oh, that's such a cool question. I wish I could like actually answer. You know, oddly enough, I always wind up coming across them in a quite haphazard way. Like I haven't really focused on it. So quite honestly, I don't even think I could tell you the names of the ones that I've watched. I just off the top of my head, I just don't even really, I don't even really have the names to kind of call on. So sorry, I can't really give a nice coherent like answer to that. Uh, but yeah, maybe I just need to kind of look back into that and remember the names of these ladies and gentlemen out there that are like kicking butt in perspective teaching. Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. I can't really answer that. I just don't know the names. Sampo asks, how would you go about studying composition as a portrait artist? Is that something that can be done separately, say in the form of thumbnail sketches? I think thumbnail sketches are a great way to study composition, and especially for like portrait painters, you know, it really can be as simple as like studying master compositions. Now, that gives the impression maybe that portrait composition is maybe quite simple. Well, maybe it is a little bit simple in the sense that you know landscape composition, cityscape, still life. Probably there's a couple like bigger issues to kind of deal with. Whereas portraiture, you know, a lot of times it's, you know, are you setting up the head well kind of versus the background, and a lot of that can be kind of conveyed, you know, by just literally like looking at what someone else did. So yeah, I think doing master studies like that is probably a great way to metabolize some of the ideas that you're gonna get, you're gonna need to get in portrait painting. Let's see. Meme Zone says, I have a dream to become a sketcher and a good artist, but my parents' dream is for me to become a SSG officer. Interestingly enough, my mother wanted me to go to the military before I decided I was going to go to art school. Uh, I think that she had a bit of a limited idea of um, my potential to do much of anything. So she just thought, you should go to the army. Eventually, I didn't do that, obviously, but you know, people have a lot of ideas about what you should do with your life, and while I think getting input from your family is great, probably eventually, you know, you need to take ownership of what that decision is eventually going to be. Let's see. Keeper of Hedges says, "What makes bad negative space?" What makes bad negative space? That's an interesting question. What makes good negative space? I guess would be the question to come to after that. I think, you know, if we're talking about space, we're kind of talking about shapes because, you know, we're working in a kind of a 2D paradigm here, right? So like space as it is defined in a drawing is kind of it's a two-dimensional thing rather than like a three-dimensional thing. So bad negative space would probably be repetitive shapes. It would probably be maybe a lack of a sense of like gesture. It could be a poor management of values. You know, I think you could apply a lot of those same ideas to like what makes, you know, bad shapes in a drawing in general. You know, I think that there's probably a lot of overlap there between what makes bad negative shapes and what makes bad design, just like in figurative work in general. Yeah, cool question though. Let's see. Let's see. Ryan Abigan asks, sorry, can't stay up too late to finish the stream. It's midnight right now in my time zone. Thanks again for answering the question. No problem, Ryan. And let's see. Let's see. Cavalia says, dude, you're awesome. Thanks a ton. No worries. And Devan Patel says, ich bin Deutsch. So you are German. Hello there. And Andreamer7 says, is squinting down just as good as removing one's eyeglasses? Without glasses, things blur for me. Is it the same effect? Actually, no. It's a different effect, but also a useful one. So like when you squint down, what happens is you're reducing the amount of light that's actually getting into your eye, which of course, as I say that, you understand is different from blurring your eyes. So when you're blurring, like when you take off your glasses or kind of blur your eyes out, what's happening is you're kind of like creating a kind of a broader like field of focus, right? So you're eventually like losing detail, which is actually really interesting if you want to observe color. So like when I'm doing a color study, a lot of times like I'll actually like kind of blur my eyes out so I'm not disrupted by like all the details that I would normally see with my eyes kind of wide open. And like I said, when you're squinting down, you're actually diminishing the light coming into your eyes, and so it creates, I think, eventually like a very different effect. By the way, I'm trying to like speed up my drawing here, so I feel like it's so slow. Um, but we'll get there. I think I kind of have like a little bit more time than I usually have, so maybe we'll see if we wind up like going over time. By the way, how many of you out there are drawing? I really hope that quite a few of you like have your drawing pads out and you're like sketching along with me. And if you're not, let me know what subject you would sketch, because I'm kind of open. I think I like the idea, by the way, and this is the whole reason we're doing skulls, right? Is that primarily I teach portraiture. So, you think, where does like good structure in portraiture come from? Well, you're gonna have to draw the skull, dozens upon dozens of times. Thing about like most people is, without like the motivation to draw the skull dozens of times, you're just not gonna do it. So I thought, well, if I'm there, maybe that's like enough of a reason to take the time to actually go ahead and draw the skull as many times as you're going to need to get better at it, right? So I even had the thought, oh man, well, I could do like, what if we did like a series of like 100 skulls? So like we did like 100 live streams, 100 skulls, and that way we all get like, or well, I mean, I've probably drawn well over 100, but you get the idea that like you guys would get the motivation to kind of get over the line in terms of like getting all your skulls drawn. If you're into that, if you think that's like the coolest idea that you've ever heard, like let me know. Because I also didn't want to like commit and go like, hey, let's draw 100 skulls. I'm gonna do 100 live streams, and then everybody's like, nah, we don't really like that. And like I'm the only one like drawing 100 skulls. So if you think it's a cool idea, like let me know, and that'll maybe like motivate me to get the project going and kind of like get everybody on board with it. It's kind of a huge commitment, right? Like to go like, yeah, we're gonna draw like 100 skulls together. I mean, that's, if you figure like I can't even do like, I'd have to do like 2 a month. It's like the maximum that I could do. So you figure how many years am I gonna be doing skulls? Anyway, whatever. If you want to do it, let me know, and I'll see what I can do about that. Let's see. MJ says you're our cheerleader. Indeed, I am. Dana Kelly asks, do you think it's important to learn to work digitally to keep up with the world? That's a kind of cool question. I mean, there are painters out there that, frankly, like they just want to make like historical reproduction work, and so for them, like, who cares? I feel like, I'm very, what's the word, like, I love sci-fi books and stories, and I'm enthralled by the idea of the future. And so for me, it was so much like a hand in glove that I was gonna like kind of in some way get involved in like digital work. So for me, it was really about my own enthusiasm and my own like interest in doing it. So yeah, like, but I also feel like it's one of those things where, if you're not feeling it, like, I don't know, is it going to be like a great value to do it? I'm not so sure. I can say that it's only been a benefit to me. Like I haven't experienced, any negative outcome from it, that like, oh, I kind of get too distracted from my analog work or something. That's never really been a thing for me. So for what that's worth, I think like if you did do it, you definitely wouldn't regret it. So kind of dip your toe in the pool and just kind of see how you feel, because it's I think it's a kind of an interesting, obviously a very interesting tool, you know, it wouldn't have gotten to where it is by being uninteresting. But I think it also has like a lot of cross-discipline application. So there are a lot of things that it allows you to do that are kind of interesting to think about, right? Like, and some schools, like I think like the Barcelona Academy, actually they have with Jordi Alma, this great guy from Barcelona out there, like running his school. I think they have like actually like digital like features to their education. Like it's proper like atelier training, but they have like a much more kind of modern vibe about that. So yeah, I think it's great. If it's great if you're into it, like you'll never regret doing it. If you're like kind of on the fence about whether or not you want to, say go for it. Let's see. Oh, there's a bunch of questions that have come in, and then like they've scrolled too far. Let's see. Greed Marks asks, Stephen, could you break down the thought process behind skull study just at the end of the stream? You seem to do it in a very mechanical manner. I would like to know a bit about the logic behind it. So, kind of cool question, because what we're talking about really is like having a kind of procedure in drawing and painting. I think we all start out drawing and painting, I think, in a fairly like naive way, right? Like we just look at stuff and we try to draw it, and then like that's that's how you kind of start off your life as a person who wants to draw eventually. And that's totally fine. It's just, you know, the nature of life. But then I think eventually it's very useful to have a procedure. So a repeatable entrance into kind of the drawing world, which is essentially a world of organization, right? Like, you know, you could think of, and this is kind of like a fascinating idea, I think, but you could consider that like a blank paper is kind of the ultimate chaos. It's an abyss. It's a total emptiness, and your endeavor with value and with line and with the tools at your disposal is to kind of organize that space to create volume and depth, right? By the way, does that not sound like so fascinating? Like it's ideas like that I, you know, keep drawing so like vital and alive to me, is that, you know, I feel like describing it that way is something I can never get bored of. But in order to do that, right, and to get good at it, you need to obviously repeat that process over and over again. So you need to practice a lot. And to practice, of course, it helps to not have to like improvise that process every single time. So you eventually develop a kind of procedure for your drawing. And that is the kind of logic that I believe you're referring to when you're saying what is the logic behind like kind of studying the skull and how I draw the skull. And that's how I think of it anyway as well. It's just that, you know, I have this procedure that I repeat, and then basically you kind of improvise inside of that procedure, which that eventually, like drawing and painting, is kind of an improvisation. Or at least that's the way that I find the greatest amount of like enjoyment in it, is when I'm able to take a form, right, like portraiture, and create improvisations inside of it, right? Like for those of you out there, like MJ, I know studies music. Those of you out there that are like, you know, play instruments and things, right? You know, you kind of study all these chords, not so you can like perpetually play chords, but so that you can play music. And even when you play music, you don't play literally the same music every time. Well, even if that was your goal, I think that it naturally comes with a certain amount of change or alteration. And great musicians, in a way, they interpret, they change the performance in a sense. Like each time they play it, it's like a little bit different, right? So, or at least I know like great jazz musicians like that will be the way. I imagine also, you know, great musicians of many different genres. You know, I'm sure that's because I'm not a great musician at all. I would have loved to have been a musician too. Like that would have been fantastic, but it was not in the cards for me. Um, but I imagine that like musicians of many different genres understand that like performance is a kind of improvisation. Music exists in that moment, and then that particular performance disappears forever, right? It's the ultimate like performance art. Anyway, enough about music that I know maybe very little about, but here we go. What's the next question? Let's see. M says, drawing a skull, was not prepared, so just sat down and started sketching. That is a perfect thing to do. Kay Lunny asks, I'm drawing with you for the first time ever drawing a skull. That's right. This is number 1 in the 100. Let's see. Ariana is drawing alongside. Go for it, Ariana. Sophia Johnson says, I'm drawing a cast right now. These live drawing sessions really motivate me. That is great to hear. That's exactly the kind of news that I need to hear. So really, really cool to hear that. Let's see. And Dreamer7 says, you're a wonderful teacher and you use vocabulary so descriptive and articulate. Thank you so much. So a lot of people are drawing. It's good. Keeper of the Hedges asks, would you prefer drawing large or drawing small? That's an interesting question, because there's more to it than like what initially is like evident, right? When you're making like a really large drawing, the amount of like detail that you need to put into that drawing increases immensely. So like if it's a big drawing, you need to be like in it for kind of the long haul. Like you're not going to be able to do like a much larger drawing as rapidly. So I almost think, like if I'm really vibing on a subject, like maybe I would do like a really large drawing of it. But if it's something that I'm just like testing out and maybe like, I don't know if I really, want to get too deep into it, and probably I'd do like a smaller drawing just to spare myself the need to kind of work so hard on it. So like when you're planning to do like a bigger project, like kind of you got to know what you're in for. So that's where like having done studies and things actually is really really helpful, because it kind of separates a little bit, that momentary excitement from, understanding what the whole task is actually going to be. As large drawings, let me tell you, and I've done, I don't know if anybody will have seen it, but I've done like a life-size drawing in graphite, like a life-size torso of a man in graphite. And let me tell you, it did not happen fast. It was a really, really long form drawing. And in the end, actually, like I was quite satisfied with it in some ways from like an artistic perspective. This is also something just, a word to the wise for those of you that are out there like looking to be a professional about it. Eventually, if I was smart, I maybe would have reconsidered, because the market out there for like really big, like male nude figures is pretty slim. And so it's a drawing that I spent like really a long time on, and it only ever stayed in my personal collection, which is a tough pill to swallow for like a working artist. For those of you out there that are out there in the market, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's tough to like put a 0 on the return sheet when you look at like the investment of your time. I mean, it's not. I know it doesn't sound romantic for all like the young people out there that are studying. And I definitely, I think there's a place for that kind of romance and that feeling of like, I just want to get out there and I want to make art. Like that's really cool too. And I never want to diminish that, but just the reality is like you get a little bit older and, you're out there like trying to, make a go of it as an artist. These are some of the things that you kind of encounter, right? You're like, there'll be a time when you'll think that everybody's going to get this and love this. And then they won't. So it's just worth doing those studies, doing those smaller studies, and just even seeing what you feel about it. Because in some ways, I remember this is a great advice actually that I was given as a teacher. I did this really big painting, which actually turned out well, and eventually did find a home, so that was nice. But I was showing it to, the director of the program I was studying at, and he like really dismissively, I remember feeling at the time, very dismissively said, "Oh, where's the color study for it?" And I was like, "Oh, well, no, I didn't make a color study. I think I thought I kind of knew what the composition was going to be and stuff." And he was like, I think at the time, like he just wasn't really interested in whatever I had to say. So he just kind of like blew me off a little bit. But the interesting thing like behind that was basically, if you haven't done a color study, I don't even think really how you feel about your drawing. Because in your mind, everything's like a great idea, right? Like it looks like, I'm sure in my mind that it's going to be a fantastic painting. But if, a lot of times, and you'll know if you've like kind of engaged in doing these studies, a lot of times you do the study and you realize like, oh, it's not that good. Like maybe I'm not even that excited about the idea. So the study is like a way to ensure that you don't even necessarily like waste your own time with a subject that maybe in the long run you don't really want to do. I hope that's not too like dream killing for anybody out there. Let's see. Sampo says, I love the idea of doing a 100 skull challenge. Maybe make it a contest on Patreon. Ooh, I like the idea. Michael Kondo says, I would be drawing if I wasn't listening while writing code or a project. That's amazing. I didn't know you could like write code and listen to stuff at the same time. I mean, like, I thought coders were like, just in the zone. But that's cool that you're able to do both of those. Let's see. Dwayne says, would be interested in doing quick portrait sketches, 10 to 15 minutes each. Jamie says, the 3/4 portrait studies keep coming up. Feel like sign from the universe that I really need to improve. Very cool. Remy Sapin says, hi, Stephen. Yep, drawing along as you talk. Very relaxing. That's cool. Sampo says, by the way, can you critique the planes of the head model from John Asaro? How would you use it in conjunction with the skull to block in your portraits? That's an interesting take. I never really thought about that because, and this is something, so coming up, by the way, part 2 in my Drawing Essentials series is coming out on February 1st. Those of you that were on my Patreon, you've already seen part 1 and participated in the making of it. And part 2, like I said, is kind of coming up in February. In that, what I'm actually going to cover a couple of different concepts that are out there related to like blocking in the head. So I'm going to go over Loomis's kind of method for kind of blocking in the head. I'm also going to talk about how that kind of meshes with my conception of kind of blocking in the head. I might even, maybe we'll see if we have time, might even mention a little bit about Riley and some of the Riley method concepts out there. So I think that's going to be kind of really informative because each of these things kind of deserves its own like kind of deep dive, like John Asaro, for all of us that look at the John Asaro head and go, I would do this differently. And James Gurney has a great post about this. He was saying that like when he was in art school, like everybody like had their own take on like the planes of the head. Like, oh, I would do it this way, or I would do it that way. And like, that's all cool to like have those ideas, but like John Asaro did it. So his is like out there to be talked about. And so I think, until you like take that step, I'll definitely be giving like a balanced view about Asaro, because for anything that I feel like it doesn't have, it does have the fact that it's out there already and that it exists and that it's like this kind of tremendous tool for students to use. So I would just temper all of that as well. But I think, yeah, like the idea of doing like a critique of the planes in terms of their utility. I will be doing in a way like, I guess, kind of a critique of like Loomis's method, and which will be in general positive. Like, I don't feel any need to like to to like tear apart, his method. I think is a really good one. And for all of the those of us out there that like kind of train from life and direct observation, all that stuff, like maybe the Loomis head has this stigma around it that like, oh, it's this kind of conceptual thing. The ideas are actually not. They're not so different, in fact. So we'll definitely get into that in part 2. Which, by the way, to participate in those sessions, all you have to do is be an actively subscribed patron, and you will get to kind of participate in the live stream. So I highly recommend it because I really enjoy making them. Right, but back to the questions here. Rohan Rana says, "Have you ever drawn?" Wait, what does she say? Have you ever drawn a self-portrait but changed some of your features slightly because you don't like them? No, I think if I ever did change something, it's because it was just inaccurate. So I've done self-portraits where they didn't look enough like me. That's definitely happened. But no, I've never changed something just due to not liking the way that it looked. But I could totally understand that motivation. I'm sure I could feel that as well. I've had a very large nose all my life. Maybe I'd change that. Who knows? Let's see. Paul Aguilar says, "How precise should I do the Bargue plates? I feel like I always change some things." I guess I'm asking, how do I know when I'm done with a plate? That's a cool question. Right. So Bargue plates, and this is why, to get back to something I said earlier, like one of the reasons why I always recommend people to try to like study with someone in terms of their Bargues is that it's actually not about making a perfect copy. And I taught Bargues for Bargue drawing for, oh my goodness, for probably 12 years. And the thing is, like, you can spend a long time trying to make like a perfect Bargue drawing. But in making a drawing for, just a few days, you can actually get a lot of the concepts that you need from a Bargue drawing. So for me, I kind of eventually, and I mean, like, I wasn't, in charge of the curriculum at the time, so, it wasn't for me to say, but eventually I kind of came to the place where I felt like people are just like spending their time on these Bargues. Like, I could give them, the concepts that they wanted a lot faster. Now, here's the trick about that, is that just because you've heard the concept doesn't mean you understand it. So taking all the time to actually like practice the Bargue is where you're like practically applying that idea. That being said, to make a perfect Bargue, you could take, up to like 75 hours. And the question is that excessive? Is it excessive? I don't know. I mean, how much time have you got? If you have the time, it's great to spend the time. You'll not regret pushing yourself a little bit further than you think you can go, developing your skill in rendering a little bit more than you had before. Those are always going to be like good things. But there's within reason. So I'll actually just give you a number and say, if you're spending more than 35 hours on a Bargue drawing, cumulatively, I think that you're probably spending too much time on it. Now, there's some variables. I prefer to study Bargues or to teach Bargues in graphite. If you're working in charcoal, it can be a little bit less wieldy, and so you can incur some like different technical problems there. But in general, let's say, 35 hours is probably a decent amount of time to spend on a Bargue. And after that, it's just about your enthusiasm at that point. And also, like, in terms of like how to know when you're finished, I mean, it's a little bit different when you're a student. When I was when I was a student, I think I had a kind of different perspective about things. But eventually, as an artist now, I kind of think about, well, what's my enthusiasm level? Like, if I'm still excited to do something, then I can keep it up. But if I kind of run out of enthusiasm, like that's the fuel. And if I don't have that, even if I am still working, I'm probably not working efficiently. So that's my, yeah, it's my take. Excuse me, guys. This is live. That's my take on that one. And let's see, Rohan Rana asks, do you zoom into your reference pictures? Do you take a closer look very often or just prefer to look at the picture as a whole? Yeah, no, I'll zoom in for sure. Yeah, nothing wrong with zooming in. I mean, every now and then you kind of need to see things closer, and I'm used to being able to like walk up to a model and actually look at them. So yeah, it's quite natural to want to zoom in a bit. So nothing nothing wrong there. Yeah. Okay, Lunny asks, if I post my skull drawing from this live on Instagram and tag you, will you see it? I'll tell you what, I totally will. I will definitely see it. By the way, for everybody that is doing this that happens to be drawing, and I know all of you have Instagram accounts anyway, so I'm not even going to preface this by saying that if you have an Instagram account, post your skull out there, tag me in it. If I'm able to see all of them, I'll share some of them on my stories, and shout you out. But like, put them in your stories, put them on your feed, and give me a tag, and I'll definitely shoot you a like, as many of you as I find out there, and spread the word about skull sketches. Because like I said, I want to be here doing it. Like, I want to like make this like a thing, to where, you know, everybody's like motivated and like getting work done and kind of building their skill and stuff. But of course, like, it's got to be like a thing. It's got to have like enough of an audience to kind of commit the time to it. But I'd love to do. Nothing would make me happier than like just continuing like sketching and Q&As with everybody. Let's see. Salman Alamir says hello from Saudi Arabia. Hello, Salman. MJ says, hi Stephen, any tips for someone who's never drawn the figure before? I find it overwhelming. Yeah, well, not all figure drawings are the same, or not all figure studies are the same, I guess. You know, when you come down to like, what is your purpose? Like, why are you doing the study? I think that things can become a little bit more manageable, which is to say that, like, if our point is to make a fantastic drawing of the figure, well, we have some criteria and we have some stuff that we need to do in order to kind of make that happen. If we're being introduced to the subject, and MJ, I happen to know that you do study music as well, there are drawings that are just like practicing the scales, and you need to like set yourself up to be able to also do that in drawing. So you want to do at first, I think, like kind of 2-hour drawings. So just basically like very simple sketches where all you're focused on is just kind of blocking in a pretty good figure. And so like, once you get to that place where you're able to like kind of block in a pretty good figure, then, you know, we can kind of take it on to the next stage. Because really, you know, if you're not doing a good block in, like, chances are you're not going to be doing a really great figure drawing. And so you are going to be in that situation where you're kind of like kind of just like banging your head on a wall a little bit. You know, you're going to be up against that kind of that glass ceiling of, you know, fighting against the mistakes that you made a little bit earlier in the drawing. And so if there's a way we can avoid that, it's kind of practicing how to make a block in the first place and prioritizing that before you kind of get into longer form studies. And that for me is a good way to kind of avoid a little bit that sense of feeling overwhelmed. Is just put yourself on the clock. You got 2 hours to make the drawing. You make it what you can in that time, and you get on with your life, and you do the next one. Like, and that's a great way to kind of get the sense of mileage that you need as well. So if you're going to try and get to that place where you've done like 100 figure drawings, you know, setting that clock, if even internally, is a great way to kind of ensure you can do that. Listen, I totally feel you about like getting overwhelmed. I remember quite distinctly, actually, my first my first figure drawing in the model room when I went to Florence was intimidating. I was very intimidated. Now, actually, I did a pretty decent drawing, and this is not tooting my own horn, because I did after that many, many, many terrible drawings because I really got in my own head about it. You know, once I realized that there was like true, nearly empirical accuracy in drawing, I totally flipped out. Like, I put this insane standard on my drawings, which actually made me draw much worse for like a very long time. But the first one, I was like a little bit naive, and I didn't do that bad. Not quite beginner's luck, but I didn't. It was like I didn't have pressure, so like I just did whatever, and it was all right. And like I said, after that, I did like heaps of terrible ones immediately after that. So for what it's worth, those, like, it's a totally, like, it's the most normal thing to be like kind of overwhelmed a little bit by figure drawing. There's so much coming at you so fast, especially with a nude figure, that like, yeah, unless you have some preparation, it's gonna be difficult. So time yourself, give yourself that time on the clock, and then kind of get on with it, because mileage is, I think, one of the first hurdles that we have to jump, right? So let's see. MJ asked about, what about short figure poses? I think I just mentioned that. JD Anarchy says, I'm drawing this one in white pastel on black paper. I always love that effect. I think it's a really cool effect. Greed Marks asks, I want to sketch the plant pot as a study. I always struggle with pot shape, but I'm doing stuff for work. Yeah, like inorganic forms can in some ways be like more challenging than like organic ones. Like when you're drawing something that has to be geometrically accurate, like it's a little bit of a different endeavor than drawing something like a skull. I mean, like, there's plenty of inaccuracies in this skull that I'm drawing, but also like it still looks like a pretty good skull, so you can kind of do a little bit of both, right? When you're drawing organic stuff. But like inorganic things, mechanical things, there's a little bit more of a kind of demand on like just raw precision, which can make them a little bit of a, it can be a bummer. Maybe if you like to draw like that, then maybe it's exciting. But in any event, yeah, I totally hear you. That's definitely a thing that I think, is pretty universal to experience. Let's see. M says, I'm so looking forward to February upcoming drawing essentials. Love that you're going over loomis, planes, etc. Really helps to make them useful. I think that's true. Chris N says, in studying figure drawing, should I focus first on gesture drawing or learning anatomy? How much time should I spend on quick gesture sketching versus finished drawings versus drawing anatomical studies? Yeah, let's clarify a little bit maybe the role of anatomy, like what anatomy is going to do for you. Anatomy definitely is a way to assist your kind of understanding and your efficacy when you're drawing the figure. So if you're going to get really good at drawing the figure, and I mean really good, I'm not talking like passable, I mean like if you're going to be quite excellent, you're going to learn anatomy on some level, even if it's just, idiosyncratically, like in your own way, you're gonna study it, but you're going to have some like level of anatomical knowledge, even if you don't even like necessarily put that name on it, that you're just like, you're drawing a little bit like the roundness of the rib cage or whatever, like on some level you're going to be engaging with that, and so maybe it's important to like understand like where that is. When I was teaching anatomy at the FAA, it was initially a first-year course. I always, for years, had a problem with this being a first-year course, because it was my contention that in order to study anatomy for artists, you need to study it through drawing it. And if you are simultaneously learning the rudiments of actually how to draw, it stands to reason that you're not going to be drawing well enough to assimilate knowledge through drawing, right? So for me, I always wanted to push it to second year students. And eventually in the US branch, after I left Sweden, eventually we did do that. After some conversations with Jordan, we decided, yeah, it was going to be like a really good idea to do that. And I think the evidence bore that out eventually, that students who knew how to draw were necessarily going to apply their anatomical knowledge better to their drawings, because the active learning that they did was much more kind of integrated into a drawing process. So I really believe that it starts to help you a little bit more once you actually know most of the fundamentals. I think it's a little bit more of an advanced topic. Now, this is like studying anatomy properly. Can it be cool and interesting and engaging to study anatomy even if you're just trying to figure it all out? Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely, why not? But if you're having curiosity about like where, when, how, I would say that you got to ask, what is your level of proficiency like already? Do you already know pretty well how to draw? If so, I think assimilating anatomical knowledge and technique is going to do a lot of good for you. If you're just struggling to figure out the basics, maybe not. But you know what the truth is? If you're like totally jazzed about anatomy and you're like totally driven to figure it out, that can be an asset too. I mean, every individual is like totally different, and since I'm not beholden here to come up with a like uniform practice for like everybody who ever studies drawing, I can just say, listen, if you're like climbing up the walls wanting to learn anatomy, don't stop yourself from doing it. But if you're kind of wondering how does this fit into my education overall, I can say that you'll probably find the most utility in doing it probably a little bit later on. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. So that's a lot of. Actually, honestly, I'm almost getting to all the questions, which is pretty rare. We must be up on 2 hours by now, though. I wonder how long it's actually been. Let's see. And Dreamer7 says, how many hours daily should a self-taught artist aim to do in order to rapidly develop? Well, to rapidly develop, listen, you're not going to like the answer to this question. Because the reality is probably to rapidly develop, you're going to be talking about 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I mean, that was the standard at the academy. That's what we did for 3 years. That's what I did for 4 years. So in reality, it is a lot of time to spend. Now, that is the, in optimal circumstances, that is the ideal. In reality, you can benefit, I think, any amount of time that you draw, so long as you have, I think, like some good concepts to work with. It is possible, by the way, to do plenty of drawing and not really progress. And this is like I talk a lot about, people ask, oh, what about being self-taught? What about being self-taught? And I'm usually pretty kind of hardline about, go out there and find an expert and get some insight from them. Just because I feel like you can spend a lot of time spinning around in a circle, if you are your only guide in terms of like kind of learning. But optimally, honestly, 6 to 8 hours is what it takes to really, really get good and to really advance. I'd love to hear, by the way, other people's thoughts about this, because I only really know this from, well, that's not even true. I was going to say I only really know this from my own experience, but the truth is, like, I've watched many students over the years as well. Like I taught at the academy for like 12 or 13 years, and the reality is even very good people, took all of that time to kind of get to where they had to go. So, be brave and like take whatever time that you can, because it's a pursuit that you love. But also maybe the real message here is like be patient with yourself, because it's another thing that gets kind of lost if you're studying all on your own, is that how do you know how much is enough? How do you know what, how do you measure yourself, like in terms of progress and whether you're kind of achieving your goals? It can be a little bit challenging. So um, yeah, it's good to get that sense of perspective from someone who's kind of been there. Right. So somebody who hasn't asked the question before, I don't recognize his name, but Climbing Tweedle says, is there an inexpensive adult skull reproduction that you have found relatively accurate? There's a lot of bad, cheap skulls out there. That is so true. And I've seen some of them, and they're pretty rough. I use one from 3M Scientific. It's a company that makes medical models. You can probably spend about maybe 50, 60 US on it and get a really good skull. So it's very attainable. 3M Scientific. I think you can even get it on Amazon. It's like that ubiquitous, this particular model, and that's the one I'm drawing right now, or that we're drawing, is the 3M Scientific model. So yeah, go out and grab one. Just have your own. It's totally useful, and I mean, like, how easy they are to get online nowadays. Like, there's no excuse if you're like a portrait artist or an aspiring portrait artist or a student. There's literally just no reason not to have one of your own. Like, all of the insight that you will get from using it, you will forget about the cost long before the utility of the skull has been maximized. So yeah, go for it. Let's see. Sampo says, just a chill, casual question. What are some of your best memories from your student years at the FAA? Oh, that's a great question. It really brings a smile to my face. Uh, some of the best times, one of the things that I really miss about Florence, and this is like unlike even, all right, so I taught at like 3 branches of Florence Academy. I taught in Italy, I taught in Sweden, and then I taught at the one in the US while it existed, which it no longer does. But in Florence, for whatever reason, I think it was a little bit like the kind of expat nature of it, that like just about everybody there was not from there. Like in Sweden, like a lot of our students were Scandinavians. They were from Sweden or Norway or somewhere around. So they kind of had a little bit more like their own life going on. Whereas when we were in Florence, 99% of us, all we had on was the school. And so in a way, like, everybody did kind of everything together in a way. So like every weekend, and I mean, this sounds all right, this is just the facts, but like every weekend there was like a party at somebody's apartment to like go to, and you obviously just see everybody there that you studied with all the time. And while that sounds like it would get really monotonous, it never really did. Partly because Florence is like so beautiful, and also like there's just plenty. If you want to be distracted and find nightlife, there's plenty of that in Florence as well. So I think everybody had like a really good time studying there, and it's something that, I mean, it had its time and place, and maybe, when I was living in the US, I don't even know if I would have had time, honestly, to do all that stuff because I was so busy with everything else. But in Florence, when I was a student, it was the perfect time, and I really, really, really miss that part of it. Or like, not even miss. I mean, life is very different for me now, so I don't know if I miss it so much as like I appreciate what it was when it was that, and that was a really, really great time. And I'm sure that a lot of people that are studying in Florence, I'm sure they have still a pretty similar experience. So that was nice. Other things that were cool about the time I was studying, of course, is that Florence is like of course a museum city. So where I grew up, it was like basically just like 7-Elevens, and I mean, well, I grew up in Miami, so like it's not like there was nothing in Miami. But like if you were interested in like classical painting and sculpture and art in general, like it might as well have been empty because like there's so little of it, so little access to it, and it's not like any of the schools that I went to ever really, like brought it up or introduced these ideas. So in that sense, it was quite inaccessible. But in Florence, like you walk out the door and you're there around architecture that's like several hundred years old. And I know that like Florentines, like they live in that, and it's like, yeah, whatever, it's just that's just the city that we live in, and that's fine. But for me, it was not anything that I could just like go, yeah, whatever. It was amazing. It was absolutely mind blowing. And of course, like if you're from places in Europe, if you're from Vienna, you're from Paris, even if you're from Stockholm, there's still going to be like some touchstones of the past like that. Where I was from in Miami, there literally just was not that. If it's older than 50 years or so, you got rid of it. So just like kind of living in a city like that was for me like just it was one of just the best things. I'll always look back on it so fondly. I even think now like of like, oh, as soon as I can, as soon as the quarantine or coronavirus allows, I want to take a trip back to Florence, just kind of be in that city, because I feel like there was always this sense like in Florence that being an artist like we are, it made sense. I always used to say, like back in Miami, you kind of like talk to people or whatever, and they go, oh, what do you do? And you'd say, like, oh, well, I'm an artist. And maybe this is just the people that I knew. But there was always this implication that like, oh, I'm an artist, but like, oh, but what do you really do? Like, what do you do for a living? Because like there just weren't people that did that. And I talked about this when I was like younger, the idea that somebody could be an artist is not really something I understood. So maybe there's some element of like, it's just about me, like I didn't know these things. But like in Florence, you'd go around, you talk to Italians, and they'd say, oh, what do you do? Go, I'm an artist, and they're like, oh yeah, okay. Like they kind of like, it kind of makes sense. Like they live in a culture where the time when people did that was not so far away that as to be like totally possible to like just dismiss it as like, oh, but what do you really do? Anyway, so there's just so many things. I mean, this part of the conversation could go on forever and ever, and I'm sure that eventually it would cease to be charming in a live stream. But yeah, I loved the time that I spent there, and don't regret a minute of it. Right, so there's a whole bunch of other questions, but I'm pretty sure that we've been here for like a couple of hours, and while I do enjoy it, sitting down for like 2 hours straight actually eventually is a little bit taxing on my butt, and so I want to get up and like walk around and do stuff, and go like make dinner and things. So probably we're gonna end the live stream here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you are watching and sketching along, please remember to post your skull on Instagram, tag me, Stephen Bauman Artwork, and also if you're watching and you're not a Patreon subscriber, you can find all of my portrait tutorials at patreon.com/Stephen Bauman Artwork. It's like 180 hours. You pay $10, you get access to all of it. It's a steal. And I'll put a link up here on one side or other of this video so that you can go straight there if you would like to. Thank you so much to everybody that asked questions today, and stay tuned for the next one. We're going to do another skull sketch. I'm not going to say yet that we're going to go to 100, but we're going to go somewhere. We're going to keep sketching skulls, I think. Thank you guys so much, okay?